Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to your Sunday School class for the 2nd of August, 2020. The key verse for today is Numbers chapter 11, verse 17. And the title of today's class is Frustration versus Trust. If you want something done right, do it yourself. That's an old saying most people are familiar with. It's important for people to be responsible and not to expect others to do things for them. But it's also important for one to know their own limitations and to know how to get help. If you believe you are the only one who can get things done correctly, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of disappointment and a lot of frustration. Trusting ourselves to do everything can become overwhelming. Sometimes we need to trust others to avoid frustration. Moses learned the hard way about the frustrations that come from trying to do too much by himself. Go ahead and read Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 to 25. Go ahead and read it and pause the video and play again when you finish reading. Moses was an Israelite, but he was raised by Egyptians. He became frustrated by the way the Egyptians mistreated his own people, the Israelites. But instead of seeking God for direction, Moses took the matter into his own hands. Now, some may say that Moses did nothing wrong because he was defending his fellow Israelites from the abusive Egyptian. Moses believed that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them. But murdering the Egyptian was not how God wanted to show the Israelites that he sent Moses. Moses waited until the Egyptian was alone. Then, after he believed that no one was watching, he murdered the Egyptian and hid the body. He hid the body because nobody was around and he thought nobody was watching. The murder occurred well after the Egyptian was beating the Israelite. Moses didn't kill the Egyptian because he was trying to defend the Israelite. Moses murdered the Egyptian in vengeance. Vengeance is something God does not want us to practice. In Romans chapter 12, we are clearly told that revenge and vengeance is not for us to practice. It only belongs to God. Moses took the matter into his own hands and he paid the consequence. Moses had to wait in exile for 40 years after murdering the Egyptian before he could be used to fulfill God's plan. That's a big lesson it's a big lesson to learn for wanting to do things yourself out of frustration. How do you react to frustration? You can react without analyzing the situation and risk creating more problems, or you can step back, take time to settle your emotions, and allow God to guide you in His plan and in His time. If you put your faith in God and let Him work His plan, you'll see how much better things turn out. Now, when it comes to the Israelites, they didn't handle their frustration well either. Eventually, Moses returned to Egypt after 40 years to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and out of slavery. The entire journey out of Egypt to the Promised Land should have been filled with joy and celebration. But instead, the Israelites frustrated Moses and found many excuses to complain. Read Numbers chapter 11, verses 1 to 17. What were some of the things the Israelites did to frustrate Moses? They constantly complained. They chose to only bring up the good things about Egypt, despite the fact that they were slaves in Egypt. They were ungrateful. They were pessimistic. And they even blamed Moses for what they were going through. In spite of the miracles God had done for them, the Israelites continued to be ungrateful, and they continued to complain. Their bad attitude made God angry, and it frustrated Moses, and it began to take its toll on him. What did Moses do at that time when he was frustrated? He prayed to God for the answer. The prayer was simple, and it was effective. He told God what was going on, and he told God how he felt, and God answered him. How did God help Moses with his frustration? God anointed 70 leaders to help Moses with his leadership responsibilities. They divided the work and made things much easier for Moses. Now Moses had led the Israelites out of Egypt to the Promised Land with a land that had plenty of food and had plenty of resources. But even as they stood right outside of that Promised Land, the Israelites still complained. By this time, Moses was older and wiser. He now knew how to replace frustration with patience. Read Numbers chapter 14, verses 2 to 5. How did Moses respond to the complaints of the people? Moses humbled himself face down, demonstrating a servant's attitude toward God and toward the people. God doesn't expect us to fall to the ground every time we encounter a frustrating situation, but he does want us to remember that he is a source of good and permanent solutions. How do we show our humility to God? We can speak to him through prayer. We can express to him our gratitude. And we can put our trust completely in him. Read Numbers chapter 14, verses 6 to 10. Moses wasn't alone in the struggle to lead the Israelites to the Promised Land. his brother Aaron, and 2 spies named Joshua and Caleb, who had seen the land and trusted God's plan to possess it, begged the Israelites to trust in God's promise. The 4 of them worked together to convince the people to follow God's plan. Why shouldn't we try to overcome frustration alone? It may be tempting to face battles alone, but if we do, it prevents us from receiving help that God knows we need. Why is it important to look to other Christians for help when it comes to our times of frustration? When it comes to getting help with spiritual matters, you're better off getting help from someone that shares the same godly standards that you have. Read Numbers chapter 14, verses 11, 19, and 20. What was God's response to the complaining? God asked, how long would they continue to sin? God saw them as ungrateful and disrespectful. How did Moses respond to God's questions? Moses prayed for the Israelites, asking God to treat them with mercy. And God listened to Moses' prayer. As we allow God to develop patience in us, He enables us to control and contain any emotional reactions that would not honor Him. This doesn't mean that we can reach a point of emotional perfection where we no longer need to deal with feelings of frustration, but we will be better prepared to handle those feelings with wisdom and with patience.